I never would have pictured myself having a pet squirrel. I've had cats and dogs, birds and gerbils as pets when I was a kid, but for the last couple years I haven't had any animals. When I saw that baby squirrel lying in the grass on my way home from work, though, I had to stop and check it out. The little guy looked only a few weeks old. His fur was barely grown in, shaking and squeaking, making sad little noises with its tiny little mouth. It was just a few yards away in the grass, and I couldn't understand where its mother could be. Maybe she'd been hit by a car, I thought sadly to myself. I picked the poor thing up in my bare hands and cradled its tiny body in my palms, careful not to crush it with my oversized man mitts. The little thing had been shivering when I picked it up, but it settled back down after a few minutes and fell asleep. Its tiny breaths quick and its heartbeat fast and steady, beating so hard I could feel it through its back. I made the decision then that I needed to take it home and nurse it back to health. I got back to my apartment and made a little house for it out of a shoebox. Put a towel inside, and the tiny squirrel curled up immediately and went to sleep. The next morning, I had to figure out what to do with the thing, how to feed it, and what to feed it, as its hungry squeaks and squeals woke me up with the rising sun. With a quick check online, I found I could feed it goat milk and a couple other easily obtainable ingredients. I left him in his little box alone and went out to get supplies, feeling guilty as I closed the door on its pitiful calls for its mother. When I got home, I found it was asleep in its shoebox again. It woke up at the sound of my voice. I poured the goat milk into a baby bottle I'd purchased and managed to nurse the baby squirrel with the bottle. It sucked at the goat milk and made happy little burping noises and ran around a little bit afterwards. I let it out on the floor of my apartment and it scurried around and dropped its little turds on my area rug with reckless abandon. It was pretty adorable, though. I came to love the little guy as he grew in my home and I nursed him back to health. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, though. He was always hungry. Never seemed to be full. No matter how much I fed him. And he grew very quickly into the largest squirrel I'd ever seen. Nearly the size of a cat. Whatever hormonal issues he had, I thought, it didn't affect him that much. He'd still run around, and he'd like to play with toys. Something seemed odd about him, though. He didn't look completely squirrel-like. He looked like a mutant. His sharp teeth, and oversized body. The differences between him and the rest of his kind only grew more obvious as he got bigger. Then he began to develop little red marks all over his body. I Googled the shape of them and found a nursery rhyme, one that I'd heard many times as a child. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. But what did that have to do with a rash? I kept reading, growing more and more horrified. Turns out that song that we all learned as kids was one that they taught to children back in the Middle Ages. Ring around the rosy was a distinctive rash that accompanied the Black Plague. It was believed that bad smells caused the sickness, and so a pocket full of posies was supposed to keep you healthy. Even still, many died and were turned to ashes. The song was a reminder that we all fall down dead, eventually. I refused to believe my little pet squirrel could have the Black Plague, though. I guessed it was impossible. The little bugger was cute as the dickens. There was just no way he could be carrying a disease that wiped out at least a third of Europe in the Middle Ages. The good news was the internet said there was a cure for the bubonic plague, if he did have the bubonic plague. So I walked my squirrel, who I'd named Mr. Peanut Butter, down to the nearest veterinary clinic and told them my suspicions. They were not particularly welcoming, but agreed to treat my pet squirrel on the condition that I left him with them and went to the nearest hospital to seek treatment for myself, since I had most likely been exposed. No sense starting another pandemic, they said. The hospital wasn't very welcoming either when I told them my situation. I had already started developing ring-shaped rashes on my skin as well. They forced me to call everyone I knew and worked with. My boss wasn't happy when I told him I'd been coming in for my shifts and exposing people. But I explained I hadn't known until just then. I told him I'd just been trying to do the right thing. Just been attempting to save a poor dying baby squirrel. Wouldn't anyone have done the same? When I was released from the hospital, I went back to pick up Mr. Peanut Butter. The veterinary clinic was just about to open when I pulled up, so I waited in the parking lot. I waited for a while, but no one came to open the front door. I double-checked the hours on their sign and on Google and tried the door handle. It wasn't locked, so I went inside. The first thing that stood out was the blood. There was blood everywhere, covering the walls, floors, ceiling, all over the lobby and behind the reception desk. I found myself walking through it, despite a rational common sense that would normally tell a person to call the police, to stop, and not to walk into an active crime scene. But I had a terrible suspicion and found I couldn't stop. My brain felt a bit funny since the rings had begun to form on my skin, and I'd begun to lose all sense of self-preservation. My shoes made gummy, sticky sounds as I stepped through puddles of dark, hemolyzed blood. I walked up to the counter on trembling legs and looked over at it from the other side. There was no one there. Just more blood. Lots of it. Proceeding carefully, I went back into the first examination room. I opened the door and let out a choked whimper. There was no one in there, just more blood. Gallons and gallons of blood. Still fresh. No doctors, no veterinary techs, no pets or their owners. What the hell had happened here? A voice in my mind whispered that I knew what had happened here. I scratched at the red circle on the back of my hand. A red splotch was at its center and was intensely itchy. I couldn't stop scratching it suddenly and noticed blood was starting to leak out of it and pus as well. I went into the next examination room and the next and the next. Nothing there but blood, blood, blood. I heard a crash from the back of the room and found myself walking slowly towards the door that had opened up to the kennels and workspaces at the back of the building. I opened the door and stepped inside the large room. Cages were stacked to my right where animals were hiding, terrified in the backs of the kennels. The dogs whimpered, but the cats were silent. None of them dared to hiss or make a sound to agitate the large, furry form which lurked at the other end of the large room. The creature which crouched over the human remains was once my pet squirrel, Mr. Peanut Butter. But now it was something Much, much worse. It had grown quickly from all the flesh it had consumed. It was now over 6 feet tall, and didn't resemble a squirrel very much at all. He was eating noisily, tearing off pieces of skin from a veterinarian. His face was gone, and his gleaming skull protruded through gaps in the flesh. His eyeballs had been torn out, and I noticed his feet and left arm were missing. Mr. Peanut Butter, I heard myself whisper without thinking. His head whipped around, and I quickly realized this thing was no longer my friend. I tried to back up and reach for the door behind me, but it was already too late. Raced towards me on its powerful hind legs, impossibly fast. Its long, sharp teeth bared and dripping as it lunged at my neck. It was covered in blood and slippery. I managed somehow to stop its face from biting my throat. It came at quite a cost. My hand ended up in the thing's mouth as I tried to push it away. Its sharp teeth bit into my hand, and blood went everywhere as the thing bit down again and again and again, gnawing on me and taking off strips of flesh. Its eyes were red, and its face was pure hatred. Its long tongue lapped up blood like it was chocolate syrup dripping from an ice cream sundae. The dogs and cats in their kennels were howling and barking and hissing now. Cheering me on, my crazed mind thought. I wonder if the creature's long teeth could puncture metal bars. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything that would help. There was a mechanical pencil on the desk next to me, and I grabbed it with my free hand. I plunged it into Mr. Peanut Butter's eyeball and watched as black blood sprayed out and everywhere. The creature howled in fury and pain and increased its attack, swiping at my belly with its long and impossibly sharp claws. I stabbed the pencil into its head again and again, trying to reach into the soft tissue of its brain through its ear, its nose, its eye socket, anything which might allow me entry into the horrifying gray matter of my giant pet squirrel's mutated brain. The black liquid poured out from the creature's wounds and mingled with mine, seeping into the holes in my hand where the bite marks were and planting its poison in my veins. I felt my blood turn ice cold. Still, I stabbed and stabbed and stabbed. Eventually, I noticed the thing wasn't moving anymore. I felt a little bad thinking about all the good times I'd had with my pal, my chum, my little baby squirrel we found on the side of the road. A kitten mewed from one of its cages. I opened the latch and it crawled out and up onto my shoulder. It burrowed its tiny head into my neck, and I enjoyed its warmth, so I kept it. I walked out of there and went straight home, not telling anyone what had happened. Still trying to figure out what to name this little guy. Maybe Sonic. I used to love that game. Plus, he's really fast. Not to mention the rings, which now cover him head to toe. He's growing, too. Quickly.